Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. And today we'll be looking at my current prediction for the 2022 Senate elections. This is, I think, the first time in 3 weeks we've done a Senate map, and it's high time because all the primaries are over, we have a bunch of new polling data, and we're, I think, just 7 weeks away from the election, and so we'll be doing these every 2 weeks now. And then I think we'll do one in 5 weeks from the election, 3 weeks from the election, 1 week from the election, then we'll do one on the day of, because again, things are so fluid, things are so interesting. So before we get started with this video, please subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed already. Please like this video down below. Please comment down your prediction. And right now, before we do anything else, I want you to tell me what you think the closest Senate race will be and why, so we can just see where we're at. I think some people are going to say Nevada, some are going to say Arizona, some are going to say Wisconsin, some are going to say Pennsylvania, some Georgia, some North Carolina, maybe some Ohio. I don't know. Just tell me your thoughts down below so we can see where you guys are at. Now, that being said, we're going to get right into it by filling out our safe Democratic states here. These states are Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Connecticut, Vermont. Again, you can make a case for some of these states being, maybe kind of close. Like Washington was originally thought to be contested. And yeah, Patty Murray's only up by, I think, 11% in the polls as of right now. But that's only because mostly Republican polls have done Washington. And ultimately, the primary is really good for Democrats here. And the primaries in Washington tend to be a bit more Republican than the general electorate. So I think Murray will win by about 15%. Now, for our safe Republican states, obviously Alaska is the first one. Lisa Murkowski, Kelly Tshibaka, both Republicans. They're the ones who actually have a chance of winning. And Murkowski is, I think, is the favorite to win that race out of those two Republicans. Idaho, Utah, the Dakotas, Kansas, both Oklahoma. Although there's been some goofy polling out of there that's shown it pretty close. Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Indiana, Louisiana, Alabama, and South Carolina. And none of these states really, I think, that controversial. Missouri could have been close had it been, or could have been in a likely margin had it been Eric Greitens, but again, he did not get the nomination. They're now running a much better candidate, and it's Missouri is a right-trending state, and the Democrats aren't really making a play for it this year, so it would probably be greater than 15% margin of victory for the Republicans. Utah, again, there's an independent running here. It's Evan McMullen. He's a former Republican, but he's kind of just running as the conservative independent. He's been kind of close in the polls. He's only down by 7% right now. But again, this is a state that Trump won by 21%. Trump was a really bad fit for Utah. And, Mike Lee won by a lot more than Trump did in 2016 when he was asked up for election. So I think Lee will win by close to 20% ultimately, even though McMullen's an interesting candidate. So these are kind of the more competitive races. Again, you might have noticed some states are off the board, some states are on the board. Washington is no longer on the board, but a state like Iowa is, which is interesting. But, just thought I'd put that out there. So for our likely Democratic states, I only see two as of right now. Colorado is the first one. Colorado, again, voted for Joe Biden by 13.5% in 2020. It's very left trending. And, the polls haven't really shown up particularly close either. Michael Bennett's up by 8.5% right now. But again, that's even when you include the Trafalgar, McLaughlin, and this GOP internal poll. And they've all shown, narrower Bennett leads. But, the fact that Republicans can't even find a lead in Colorado shows they're probably not going to win it. And finally, New Hampshire. This is a state where I think Maggie Hassan is in a pretty good spot. Don Bolduc won the primary by just 2%, so it was pretty close, and it's, I guess a pretty divisive primary with Sununu endorsing Morse and, Bolduc getting the more Trumpian base out to come out for him. But as you can see, we don't have a polling average yet, but the latest polls with Hassan versus Bolduc, she was up by 4 here. She was up by 1 here. She was up by 15 and 6 here, so she'll probably be fine. I think she wins by around 5% when it's all said and done. But again, she's a good incumbent. She won in 2014, which was a red wave, and she won in 2016 against a much better GOP candidate. And in a year where New Hampshire was a lot redder, and ultimately, I think she's going to win re-election by, like I said, 5%. Likely Republican states. The first one for that is Iowa. Iowa's a state that I don't really think is actually that competitive, but it's in the likely column because we do things by margin just to visualize that. And right now, Chuck Grassley's up by 7.3%. And again, the polls in Iowa are usually pretty bad. They undershot Trump by around 6.5% in 2020. I think they're going to do a similar thing here where they'll show it closer than it actually is. But I think Grassley's going to win by just under 15%. Again, polarization is starting to catch up to him, and Michael Franken is a better candidate than we originally thought. Again, not to say he has a real chance, but I think it'll be more of a 13 point margin of victory instead of, the past landslides that Grassley got. Because in 2016, he won by like 25, and I think he wins by a lot less this time. So, I think, oh no, we have a few more here. Actually, Florida's up next. Florida, I think, as we all know by now, isn't really competitive. We've had some interesting polling that's, shown the race to be pretty close, and the average does show Val Demings within 5% of Marco Rubio, as you can see right here. She's only down by 4.1%. But when you look at the polls that have showed it close, these are polls that had Biden winning Florida. Susquehanna isn't great in Florida. Center Steep PAC has like Tim Ryan winning, so that's not exactly great. This poll is a Democratic poll. This is also a Democratic poll. And this one Demings +4 poll was from University of North Florida, which has actually been pretty good in the past. But again, it's one outlier. And ultimately, polls in Florida underestimated Trump by 5% in 2020. I think Rubio will win by close to 10 when it's all said and done. Next up is the state of Ohio. This is our final likely state. And look, I know people are going to be like, well, that's not really a fair rating because, again, things have been getting really good for Tim Ryan. And actually, I did write an Ohio deep dive on my Substack, and that's hueypyt.substack.com. Go to hueypyt.substack.com for my full thoughts on Ohio. But in summary here, when you take a look at the polls, they're pretty good for Tim Ryan. He's up by 1.5%. And ultimately, but like he's actually been ahead some decent polls. Again, Suffolk had him up by 1. And, some of these other polls aren't really that good, but, he's been leading in most of the polls. And yeah, like some people were saying, well, Trafalgar only has Vance up by 5. And, this is the poll that had Trump winning Nevada, New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania in 2020. So yeah, you can make that argument. But the thing with Ohio polls is that they're just generally always garbage in both midterm and general elections. So they had Richard Cordray winning the governor's race in 2018. They had Biden within a point of Trump in 2020 when it really wasn't particularly close. And they had, I think Hillary within 2% of Trump in 2016. And so, look, I think it'll be closer to a lean margin than a safe margin when it's all said and done. I expect Ryan to lose by about 6%. But Ohio's a red state. It's a red trending state. And, the polarization will really hurt Tim Ryan. So it'll be a really good showing when you just account for the other fundamental factors in the national environment. But I still think Tim Ryan's going to lose by around 6% when it's all said and done. Now, for our lean Democratic states, I see two as it stands today. The first is the state of Arizona. Arizona has just been getting really bad for the Republicans. And, the fact that Blake Masters can't find a lead in a single poll is just really bad for him, especially when you remember the fact that Martha McSally, like even at this point in 2020, when Martha McSally was considered, to be kind of dead in the water, she led in I think 3 or 4 polls, prior to, I think, October. And she led by one poll in October. And Masters hadn't found a single lead in any poll. Closest he's got was this Emerson poll, but again, Emerson isn't, they've been really bad as of late. Even in Trafalgar, which had Trump winning Arizona in 2020, he's down by 3. And in these other polls have done better in Arizona. Insider Advantage, you look at, Fox, Kelly's up by, pretty good margins. And in the average, he's up by 8.6%. And look, you can say the polls tend to underestimate Republicans, but historically in Arizona, that actually hasn't been the case. Again, Kyrsten Sinema was down in the polls on election day. She ended up winning her race, and Hillary Clinton outran her polls. But yeah, you can say, oh, well, Biden did about 2% worse on election day than he was in the polls. The thing is, even if you think Kelly's going to do the same, he'd still win by a lot. So ultimately, the polling lead is just too big for me to say Masters is really, in a toss-up race here. He can come back and win, but as it stands today, I think he'd lose by 3 or 4%. Next up is Pennsylvania. Again, I'm finally moving it out of the toss-up column. I had it as lean Republican for a very long time, moved it to toss-up, and, now I'm just going to say it's lead Democratic. Screw it. I know I'm going to get hate for this, and, I know some people are going to be happy with this. A lot of people, saying that I need to get on the Fetterman train, but Pennsylvania, it's just getting really hard to see Dr. Oz coming back. Because the thing with, and I'll quote Evans Grimshaw here, again, who's one of my favorite writers / podcasters about politics. What Evans says is really good because he's like, look, you can make the case for Republicans improving between now and November. Sure. Blake Masters, Herschel Walker, Ron Johnson, whatever. The thing with Dr. Oz is that everybody already knows who he is, and no one really likes him. He hasn't really consolidated the Republican base. He has terrible favorables with independents, and his approval rating is just in the toilet, whereas Fetterman is much more unknown. People are much more willing to give Fetterman a chance. Additionally, when you look at, the latest poll, I think we got from, what was it? It was, I think, let me find it here. I think it might have been Rabba. No, I think it was, maybe it was Emerson. I don't know. I think it was the poll that I think it was this poll, but I don't remember which poll it was. But it had Fetterman up by 9. It showed that most voters didn't really care about Fetterman's stroke. It showed that Dr. Oz was really unpopular, and that Fetterman was getting some number of support from Republicans, enough to get him to win. So again, the fact that we're this late in the cycle and Fetterman hasn't even trailed in a single poll is really, really good for him. Even Trafalgar, which had Trump winning Pennsylvania, has Fetterman up by 5. Even Susquehanna, which I think had Trump up in Pennsylvania on election day, has Fetterman up by 5. Emerson, which again, despite the fact that they had a Trump leading electorate, despite the fact that they, showed Oz doing a lot better with Hispanics than he actually will, had Fetterman up by 5. So ultimately, I do think the polls are actually overestimating Fetterman with white voters, and I think he won't win by 10% when it's all said and done. But when you take a look at like his leads and like where he's getting these leads from, it's not only Democratic internals, and ultimately when you're down by 10% in Pennsylvania, you usually don't win. Because again, people say, "Oh, the polls in the Rust Belt are terrible." They in Pennsylvania, they actually weren't awful. In 2020, Biden was up by 4.7% election day. He won by 1.2. So yeah, gave 3.5% to Dr. Oz. I actually think it'll be a lot more. I think he'll only lose by 2 or 3%. But as it stands today, I don't really see him winning, and I think it's a lean Democratic race. Because again, Fetterman's at 51% of the vote in all these polls. Like this is getting really good for him. The fact that they haven't really since what? They haven't really tightened since July. It's been 2 months, and like we have no reason to think that Oz is going to close the gap between now and November. Honestly, I think on election day he'll be down by 8-9%, which will still be really bad for him. Now, that's it for our lean D states. For our lean R states, I only see one right now. It's North Carolina. And North Carolina, I think, is really interesting because I think it has like the most potential to shock us because most people wrote this race off. Jeez, I can't talk. For the Democrats from the get-go. And yes, I think that Cheri Beasley is still an underdog. As you can see here, I have it as leading Republican. But she has a chance. Again, she's up by 0.4 in the polls, and Ted Budd has just not been doing too great as of lately. And again, if Beasley can maintain black turnout, she's probably going to win. Now, again, that's a big if, and it's a lot to ask of her. Again, but here's the thing. The reason the Democrats won the Georgia runoffs was because Republicans didn't get their rural numbers while Democrats got their black numbers. It's a turnout game in off-year elections, midterm elections like this. And so I think rural turnout will fall, and I think urban turnout will be decent for Democrats because of the Dobbs decision energizing them. It's really a question of black turnout. And again, I think we'll know who's going to win North Carolina the weekend before the election because we'll have the early vote data. If if the black vote is really spiking in the early vote data, I think Beasley can really win. Now, as of right now, I'm still going to take the safer bet, and I still think that it'll take the black vote spiking for me to think Beasley's going to win. But as of right now, I think she's an undervalued an undervalued candidate. I think that people don't give her enough of a chance, but as it stands today, I still think she'll lose. Now, till Democratic states, I'm going to give them two. These are Nevada and Georgia. Whoops, not South Carolina. Certainly not South Carolina. Let's start with Nevada. So Nevada has been, getting pretty good for Catherine Cortez Masto. As you can see here, she's been gaining a little bit in the polls. Again, it was fairly close for all of July. She gained a little bit in August. Now she's up by around 3%. And I just think, when you look at the polls, they've been pretty good for her. Again, Emerson has her down 1, but it's a ton of undecided. Emerson's been really bad this cycle. Fabrizio, which is a Republican poll, has her up by 1. They have her up by 4 in this poll as well. Trafalgar has Laxalt up by 3, but Trafalgar also had Trump up by 3% in Nevada in 2020. He lost it, obviously, as we know. And ultimately, Cortez Masto is a good incumbent. I think she'll outrun Biden with Hispanic women specifically, but also Hispanics in Vegas in general. I think COVID really hurt Democrats in Vegas in 2020. Once you get back some of those jobs, some of those middle income, Hispanic, Black, working class voters, that'll boost Democratic numbers in Las Vegas. I do think Cortez Masto is going to do a little worse than Biden in Washoe County, but I still think she's going to win statewide by about a point. Again, the polls in Nevada tend to underestimate Democratic support. Again, in 2020, it was the other way, but in 2018, 2016, 2012, 2010, it was the other way around. We had Republicans doing a lot better in the polls than they actually did. I think we're going to see a similar thing because, again, Trump being on the ballot basically guaranteed Republicans would be underestimating the polls everywhere. But now that he's not on the ballot in all these states and these Senate races, Democrats have a better chance of actually meeting what the polls have them at. Again, it's not me saying that Tim Ryan's going to win, but it's me saying that, look, there won't be as big of a polling miss this time as some people are expecting. And so I think that'll be enough for Cortez Masto to hold on. It will be narrow. I could totally see Laxalt winning, but he's just not a good enough candidate to flip it as it stands today. Georgia, this is really close to lean D. I could totally actually see myself moving it to lean D, but I'll keep it a tilt out of an abundance of caution. Again, that isn't me saying that I've gotten less confident on Warnock since, my last prediction where I had it as lean D. It's just me being a little more cautious because, again, I'm being less cautious in Pennsylvania, so I thought I'd compensate. Walker's up by 3%. When you look at these other polls, Center Street PAC's pretty bad, and, he's up by 13 here, which I think is ridiculous. Quinnipiac's also not great, but, when you look at these other polls, Insider Advantage is a Republican poll. Emerson literally had Walker doing 50% better than Kelly Loeffler with black voters and only had him up by 2. That's really bad for him. And Trafalgar is the poll that had Trump winning Georgia by 4.5% in 2020. And they only think Walker's up by 1. And also, it's important to remember that when you see all these polls that have Walker ahead, he's not even at 50% in any of them. And again, to win, Walker probably has to hit 50% because, as we know, runoffs tend to be a bit more democratic than election day votes. So I think that it'll go to a runoff. I think the election day vote is kind of a toss between who it goes to, but I think it'll go to a runoff and Warnock will win by about 2%. Now, final race is Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's going to narrowly stay red. Again, I could totally see Mandela Barnes winning. It will be close. But as it stands today, if I had to guess, I think Ron John wins by 2%. When you take a look at the polling data, it just isn't where it needs to be for Mandela Barnes. He can still surge. And again, I'll be honest, the latest poll we got out of, I think it was Marquette, that had Barnes trailing by, where was it? Let me find it. Yeah, it had Barnes trailing by 1%. This poll is terrible because it literally had Ron John winning the youth vote by 30. He'll probably lose it by 30, not win it by 30. So that's like a big mathematical error. So like this poll is basically the garbage for me. And then, the civics poll has Johnson up by 1. I actually kind of believe that. I think that's kind of reasonable. But again, when you consider the fact that Barnes is only up by 1% today, and in 2016, Ron John was down by 3% on election day, that's not good for him. I think he needs to be up by like 5% for me to consider him favored. Because again, the polls in Wisconsin, they missed in 2020. They had Biden up by 8. He only won by 0.6. They had Hillary up by 6. She lost by, I think, a point. And, the Republicans in Wisconsin always outrun their polls. Again, Ron John didn't lead a single poll in 2016, despite the fact that he ended up winning by 3%. So ultimately, I just don't think Mandela Barnes is a good enough candidate to beat Ron John. I think he'll do fairly well in Milwaukee and Madison, but outside of that, I see him losing ground with working class voters. I see him losing ground with the WOW counties, and to me, that's the ball game. So that's my current Senate prediction, guys. 51 seats for the Democrats, 49 for the Republicans. I think Wisconsin, Nevada, and Georgia could really go either way. I think North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Arizona are also pretty close, but just not quite as close. And then the rest, I think, are pretty solidly leaning in one direction. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. Subscribe to the channel if you are not already. Again, please tell me which states you disagree with. If you think that I had, bad reasoning for one state, feel free to comment down below. Tell me what you think. But yeah, that's where I stand today. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.